Happy New Year. It is 2024, everyone. And what does that mean? It means goals, resolutions, new books. Amazing. If you need help planning your 2024 resolutions, please reach out to me either by my email or my website or my Instagram. I'm super happy to help you all plan your wonderful 2024 ahead. I think the word that comes to my mind is pivot this year. And I'm excited. I'm excited. Aren't you excited? All right. Let's go ahead and dive into our very amazing guest, Steve Schlam, who is the author of The Harvesting of Haystacks Kane. Now, what I really liked about this chat was not just how Steve, really faces his kind of long writing career, which has so much experience in it, but also the different avenues that he's taken that feed into his experience, as well as the mentality that he has as far as, approaching your work, having the support system, like agents and feedback and things like that. So I'm excited for y'all to dive into this. It was really amazing to just talk with him, understand, what life was like, early on for him as a writer and how he pursued forward. So y'all, oh, also don't forget the fiction contest, nonfiction and fiction. If you have a memoir, nonfiction, if you published a book in 2023 as an indie author, make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find me. Just put in my full name. I am one of the chosen judges for the fiction side of things, but this is open to anyone who indie published in 2023. It is a contest by Quill Hawk Publishing. Enter, and there are some amazing goodies if you win, and there are some honorable mentions. So again, if you published a book, indie published in 2023, do check that out. Follow Quill Hawk Publishing, and y'all, I'm super excited to dive into some fiction. All right. So here we go.
Welcome to the How to Write a Book podcast, the show that helps you plan, write, and publish your book, even if you're a beginner or just feel like one. Now, for your host, she's written over a dozen books and helps others bring their books to life. Here she is, Maciel.
Okay, and welcome back to the How to Write a Book podcast. Hi, Steve. How are you doing today?
I'm okay. And you? How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. It is a fine winter's day here in LA, which you're really close to me. You're in San Diego. It's awesome.
It's a cold and shivery day down here in San Diego, actually. An unusual day because we really have the best weather in the country. So
it's gorgeous down there. Gorgeous. And I would know because I actually was there for a little while. So that's awesome.
Right. There you go. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today. Let me do a little bit of an introduction, and then, of course, I'm excited to dive in. So Steve Schlam is a multi-talented actor and writer who has lived in several cities across the U.S. and in Mexico. You hold a master's degree in creative writing in English, which you earned under the guidance of Joseph Heller, the renowned author of Catch-22. Your latest work is The Harvesting of Haystacks Kane, which tells the story of Herschel Kane, also known as Haystacks Kane, a wrestler and butterfly collector who has been exploited by those around him. Through your writing, Steve, you explore the deeper truth of existence, weaving together compelling narratives that captivate readers from start to finish. We're super excited to have you. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously we did a little bit of a bio, but Steve, tell everybody, who are you? Okay,
that's and I would like to do it in 25 words or less, but it's not going to happen. Anyway, I'm a native New Yorker, which you may be able to tell from the way I speak. I lived in New York for a whole bunch of time. Went to college up in upstate New York at Harper College, now part of Binghamton University. Got a degree there. Went to law school at NYU. Got a degree there. Mucked around looking for what I wanted to do with myself. In the process of doing that, I had begun to write, and so I got the degree from City University in New York, the one you just mentioned. And I studied with Joe Heller, who was a very, very, very down-to-earth, plain-spoken, plain kind of a guy with no airs, even though he wrote a novel whose title has entered the language, So, yeah. And I practiced law part-time for a period of time, which is a gig that is extremely difficult to come by, but I did. And eventually, it was not a good fit. It never was a good fit. And so I left and kind of mucked around all over again, looking for the next direction to take. And by accident, stumbled into a business arrangement where I wound up as an exporter selling lumber to mainly to flooring manufacturers in Europe and some in Asia as well. During this period of time, I had my writing became a more serious concern. I also started acting. I've done over the last, 30 years or whatever it is. I've acted in every place I've ever lived, and I've lived in several places, as you mentioned. I'm mostly on stage, and I've done a couple of films as well, short films. It's been a modest career, and that's okay. My focus has always been on the writing. The writing is the more serious concern, the more serious interest, I should say. Haystacks, the Harvesting of Haystacks Kane, is my first published novel. I've got some short stories. I had a couple published back when. The novel will come out. It's scheduled to come out in March. And of course, I'd love everybody in the entire world to buy it, but mainly I have to put it out there in such a way that it can be seen. And that's one of the reasons I'm here with you tonight. And so I live in Southern California, in San Diego, with my wife, in a pretty little Craftsman house with lemon and orange trees growing in the backyard.
Ooh.
So I think that's a good beginning to who I am.
Beautiful.
I've always been somebody who's fascinated by language. I was always told when I was young, hey kid, you got a really good mouth. You ought to go to law school, and which I did. My literary heroes are writers whose focus was largely on language, the plasticity of it, what it can do, what it can be made to do, how it can be twisted and turned and propelled through various hoops to bring the reader to a place, to a more transcendent experience of language that is transcendent in the sense that it goes beyond the literal meanings of the words to the layer of meaning that exists beyond and above that literal meaning. It's what I call the river of words. And you can hear it in chants. You can hear it in music. So the writers that are my literary heroes, start mainly with William Faulkner, whose work I absolutely adore, and who once said that he and Thomas Wolfe wanted to put the entire world in a single sentence. And if I could do that, I would do it in a heartbeat. And it is really what I try to do. Whether I'm successful or not is not for me to judge. I mean, it is for me to judge, but it's also for everybody else in the world to judge, I want to take you on a journey. I want you to jump into the river of words and be carried along toward some type of epiphany of what life is all about, what meaning is, and what is important in your existence. These are highfalutin goals, and I don't always achieve them. I don't know if anybody does, really, any writer. But it's always there in the out there as a kind of a goal to reach, a target to shoot at, a reminder that that's where I want to go. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love what you said, the river of words, because yeah, I mean, you can mold language to be so many different things. I mean, even just writing like a business email, if you say it this way or if you say it that way,
Right.
you could be saying different things.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I notice, I'm busy trying to contact literary journals to see if I can submit portions of, the excerpts from the novel for publication, or soliciting potential blurbs and reviews and so on. And I notice that I'm always like this. What you really want to do is crank it out, because there's so much of it to do, and you have time limits that you have to deal with. Your book is coming out on a certain date, and you want to make sure that everything is, you can accumulate all the collateral that you need to lift it up from the pack, draw it out from the pack so that it's more visible than the pack, by which I mean all the other writers who race like lemmings toward the same sea, but I can't help it. I always try to craft even a letter like that, so that it's the precise language that it ought to be, to express whatever it is I'm trying to express, no matter how mundane. And that is both a vice and a virtue. It makes me sensitive to language. It makes me a craftsman in some sense, but it also takes up more time, more internal energy, and so on and so on. But, you are who you are, and you try to make the most of it, I suppose.
That's something I can very much resonate with. I'll look over like the paragraphs, or even a short paragraph, like, what am I actually saying? Even
Right.
An instant message, what am I actually saying? What can I say better? I'm actually grateful for emojis, even though they've cut a lot of the language needs from me. But at least, like, when I have an emoji, I can put like a thumbs up or like a smile. Like, this is what I meant when I said that.
But I will tell you, I'll tell you, I don't come. I mean, I'm older than you, quite obviously, and I don't come from the place in which we used shortcuts for meaning, and so it worries me in a sense that it's so easy to use these shortcuts, but I find it, or believe it to be, alienating, because I think it distances people. When you use that type of shorthand, maybe shorthand is a better word than shortcut. When you see what I'm doing, the same thing that we're talking about. When you use shorthand like that, you don't have to reach inside for the precise meaning that you want to convey to the other person in the conversation, or in the dialogue, the email dialogue, or whatever it turns out to be. Yeah. And so you remain distant. And I think what I will, and this is a phrase I never wanted to use, but here it goes. The younger generation is extremely alienated from one another, and in my judgment, from themselves, because they don't want to make contact with the internal world that is messy and sometimes chaotic and can be threatening and so on. They want to keep it neat. They want to keep it well organized and controlled, and they don't want to show vulnerability. Is this true of everybody all the time? Of course not, but I've seen it enough to be aware of it, and it troubles me.
You have an excellent point, because I feel like I'm also fighting against that. And internally, not against with people. Me, myself, I feel those effects because I want to hurry through things. Yeah. I want to, just spit it out. So definitely what you're saying is losing that connection. I can totally feel that even with messages that I get, I have to read it, and I have to just back up and understand, where is this person coming from? What are they saying? Because they might have just said like thumbs up, but I'm actually I asked them like a yes or no question. So I'm like, even that communication. Yeah. So I absolutely.
Right. Exactly. I
So,
mean,
go ahead.
if I to go back to writing, I mean, if I could write music, I probably wouldn't be on this podcast interview with you tonight. I mean, because what I am trying to do is to write. When I talk about the language that leads you to a transcendent moment,
Mm-hmm.
that is, to do that is to write music which, to be lyrical, to be poetic, and to create something that is akin to music, because music does not have a verbal and intellectual content to it. It's all about it appeals. I mean, I'm in some sense I'm stating the obvious, but it appeals to the depths of your inner world that doesn't need to think and conceptualize. And so that is what I'm trying to do in the writing that I'm doing, in my novel. And again, whether I'm successful or not is not for me to judge, really. But I know in my heart of hearts that there are places where I am successful in just that way, and where I can take you on a ride from which, when you get off, it'll be like getting off and getting out of the car at the bottom of the roller coaster, and you go,
Yeah.
So.
And that brings me to the next question, which is, you have an extensive writing background. Why did you choose this story of Herschel Kane to be like your first published novel? Why this story?
Okay, well, that's a very fair question, and it's a question I sometimes ask myself. But the easiest answer is, it came to me in a dream. It was one of these. I was during one of these transition periods that I mentioned to you, and I was living in Brooklyn Heights, which is a historic district in Brooklyn that overlooks the Statue of Liberty and the Brooklyn Bridge, and when it was still there, the World Trade Center. And I was living in a rent-controlled building on the top floor of a rent-controlled building. It was summertime. It was hot as hell. And I went to sleep, and I had this dream, and I got up. I had begun writing at that point. I didn't begin writing the novel, but I had begun writing. I was in the middle of writing and developing my skills and accessing my subconscious, which is opening the door to my self-conscious on a regular basis, my subconscious, I should say, on a regular basis, which is what is necessary in order to be properly creative, is what I'll call it. And so I go to sleep, and I wake up in the middle of the night with a very, very powerful dream. And I got the last line of my book, which I'm not going to tell you because I want you to read it. But I got the last line of my book, and I was jarred, and I kind of didn't know where I was for a moment. And then all of a sudden I heard voices talking to me internally. Nobody was really talking to me, but they were talking to me inside my head. And I thought, oh, well, I've finally gone off the deep end. They're going to come after me soon with the butterfly nets,
Oh, no.
and take me away. And then I realized that it was characters. That characters were speaking in kind of in monologues. There was some dialogue as well, but a lot of it was in monologues and what I identified to be monologues. And so I got up out of bed, and I didn't know what to do. So I had, my desk was out in the little foyer that we had in the apartment, and I went to my desk. I had no air conditioning. It was July, I think, or something like that, and it was hot as hell. And I sat at my desk, and I had a yellow pad and a pen, and I started to write stuff and I tried to capture everything that I possibly could, because I knew instantly that this was it wasn't a poem, it wasn't a play, it wasn't even a short story. I knew right away it was a novel. Now, if you ask me how, I cannot tell you. I just knew. And so I knew that it would all disappear. It would go away. It would dissipate like smoke in the end. And so I furiously wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and I filled up a whole bunch of pages. And of course, I didn't capture everything. You can't. Your memory, and I have an excellent memory, I always did, but your memory is not capable of holding everything. Some of it's going to seep out through the cracks. Some of it's simply going to blow away, and some of it you're going to retain. And I retained a good bit of it. And then the next question arose is, what am I going to do next? Because I was working at the time, and I knew, just as I knew this was a novel and not a short story, I knew that if I continued to write, I'd never go back to work. I mean, that I would have to quit. And I was married at the time, and I didn't know whether she would be able to support us, and all the practical realities of life came rushing in, and I sat there and I went this way and that way inside myself, and finally I couldn't do it. I couldn't just throw everything over and forge ahead into the unknown. I just couldn't do it. And so I kept writing for a while and captured as much as I could. And then I went back to sleep. And the next day I went to bed to work. But I was working part time. And so what I did, I was practicing law part time, as I said earlier. What I did was I arranged to continue to do that. The guy that I was working was a small firm in New York, and the guy that I was working for was willing to let me continue. And so I arranged it so that some days I would go into the office for the full day, and then the next day I wouldn't work at all, and that day I would write. Other days I'd go into the office for half a day, and I'd either write in the morning, go in the afternoon, or work in the morning, come back home and write in the afternoon. And so I was able to do that. And in the first 6 months of writing the novel, and it began to take shape, those voices came back to me, thank goodness. And I began to, as I said, shape, or a narrative began to take shape inside in my consciousness. Was it polished and precise and pristine? No, not at all. It had to evolve. It had to be refined. It had to be cut and pasted and so on. And I did that. In the first 6 months, I wrote, I think 60,000 words. So I was doing 10,000 words a month, which I don't know whether that's good or bad, but to me, it seemed like a lot. And I mostly liked what I did, which is, of course, the impetus to continue. And then I ran into some problems, and I ran into writer's block. So there we go. Yeah. And that's a whole other story, but the fact that I did run into writer's block extended the time that it took me to write the novel by an awful lot. And if you want to talk about it, we can. If not, we can go on to other things.
No, definitely. Yeah. Tell us all about the beast of writer's block and like the whole journey, because I know that this is something that you had brought up you want to talk about. Just absolutely hits on the show that we have here. Tell us about your writer's block.
So you're a writer, but you're also a human being with a life. You're not only a writer. And so there were things going on in my personal life, and things going on in my interior life that came. I'm not going to go into all the gory details, but it's suffice to say that all of a sudden I would go sit and I did this. My routine was always the same. I wrote in the same place. I wasn't one of these people who went to. Well, we didn't really have Starbucks at that point, I don't think. When I started, but in any event, I didn't go to the library. I didn't go anywhere else. I always wrote in the same place. And all of a sudden, where everything had been coming, nothing was coming. And it's one of the most frustrating and really, in a sense, terrifying experiences you can have. Most people will never have it. They're never going to try to write a novel. But if you're a writer and all of a sudden you're dry and, you're trained to find something, which of course makes it worse, it's terrifying, because it in a sense begins to rob you of the identity that you've crafted for yourself. In other words, hey, if I'm not a writer, kind of what am I? And how come I can't do this? Why can't I do this? And so it triggers a lot of soul searching and so on. And this went on for an extensive period of time. I'd sit there and nothing would come, or I'd get 2 or 3 sentences, or I'd get a couple of paragraphs. And if I was lucky, I'd get a page, figuring 300-400 words is a page. And sometimes it was, even what I got, even if it was small, it was no damn good. Sometimes it was, but it wasn't enough, And so I struggled back and forth with this for a considerable period of time. And then not all of a sudden, but gradually, the fog, I'll call it, lifted. And, I was able to write. I never wrote, I never returned to the place where it was just pouring out of me, where I could sit and watch it come out of my arm, I never returned to that place, but I was back in control of it. And there was a channel between me and my subconscious mind that permitted me to access material that came out in the form of words, is the way I would put it, And so eventually I finished it. Kind of, then you turn to writer's block, just to finish up on writer's block, because that's the question you asked me. It was, in retrospect, as you can see, I'm not 20 or 30 years old, and it was one of the worst experiences I think I've ever had in my life. Up there with losing loved ones and divorce, which I have gone through as well, and all that kind of stuff. Because, as I said, it made me feel totally impotent, totally without control over my own destiny, and robbed me of something that I loved, because when the writing is good, I had periods where I would sit there and it really was just like it just came out of my arm. It was writing itself, and I could just kind of sit back and do that. I once wrote, there's a soliloquy, I'll call it, in my novel, that comes from my character's ex-wife. It's got sexual content in it. It's kind of my version of Molly Bloom in Joyce's Ulysses. And, I didn't do it purposely, but that's kind of the way it came out. And so actually she is reading, Ulysses when this happens. Anyway, so I guess I did do it purposely, but kind of purposely, but not, if that makes any sense. And I sat there, and it was also in the summertime. Maybe that helped me, because it was literally hot. I wrote I think it was 1,500 or 2,000 words in like an hour, some ridiculously short period of time, or less than that. I don't really remember, but it was and I'll use a sexual term, and I don't mean it this way, but it was almost an orgasmic experience in the sense of being that powerful and that again transcendent, because in some sense I disappeared and the writing replaced me, and then I came back. if that makes any sense to you at all. So,
Yeah.
and so when it was good, and when it is good, it was better than food, it was better than love, it was better than sex, it was better than anything, and is, can be. And so, and that's, I think in the end, that's why people do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, apart from whatever commercial considerations they have and are operating from, they do it because it takes them to a place they can't get to any other way. And it's a better place than most every other place they go to in their lives. And that is a kind of a, first of all, it's wonderful, but it is human beings becoming the highest forms of themselves in my judgment, you know, and who wouldn't want to go there, you know? So,
Absolutely. I agree with you. Like that feeling when you come out on the other side, it's a whole other feeling. You feel you're on a different cloud, you know, totally. So you said something that I wanted to ask further on.
sure.
And how much, do you have another 15 minutes or so?
Right.
Is that available to you? Just let me know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Cool. So you said that the fog started to lift
Right.
once you hit the writer's block. So would you say that for you, going through writer's block was like time was your healer, or was it other elements that helped you push through
Time
that?
was both my enemy and my healer, because the longer it went on, the worse it felt, and things have a way of reinforcing themselves, so that the longer you can't write, the longer you can't write. And so there has to be some way of I'm mixing a whole bunch of metaphors here, but there has to be some way of breaking the chain, so that new energy can flow in, and this particular repetitive connection of non-connection can be eliminated, and how did that happen? I don't know. It just began to happen. And in that sense, time was a healer, you know. I mean, I went through some, as I said, I had some personal stuff in my life and personal stuff inside myself, psychological stuff, maybe if you want to call it that. And as those things resolved, I'm pretty certain that they resolved inside me, and when they resolved inside me, the doors began to open up. I wasn't holding, I wasn't resisting, I wasn't letting fear or anxiety or anger or any of the negative emotions that can stop you from being creative. Not to say that you can't be creative when you're upset or angry or something like that, but a lot I found that it's a blockage, it's an obstacle. So and I assumed that as I resolved those issues inside myself, and my psyche relaxed and permitted itself to express itself again. I'm not a shrink, and I'm not playing one on TV. You know, but I mean, I think that's a pretty. I'm comfortable with that explanation.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like as you start to open up, your writing starts to open up. I want to ask a very specific question because this is something that I think I'm going through, and I think maybe other people are going through. And you kind of have hit on it, but just in case you have an additional nugget of wisdom, do you feel, or did you feel like you felt guilty? You felt, because you said that you felt that kind of like, you know, I'm not a writer. If I'm not a writer, who am I? Right. Do you feel guilty that you're like, how can I forgive myself for the time I haven't written? You know, that thought.
That's a very interesting question. I don't know if that was the case with me. I think I did a lot of beating up on myself.
Yeah.
You know, hey, look at you. Why aren't you doing this? What's the matter with you? You know, that kind of stuff. I don't know that I felt guilty about taking the opportunity away from myself. I could not say a definite yes to that. It was more that the anguish, I wouldn't call it guilt. The anguish increased the longer I couldn't do it. And of course, the more anguish you have, the more uptight and tense and unnatural you become, you know.
Yeah.
And that inhibits creativity big time.
So from what I understand, you know, it was a gradual process, but do you remember any specific day that you were like, this is it, Eureka, I finally pushed through?
No, I didn't. It wasn't Eureka. It wasn't that kind of thing. I mean, it was more, the beginning of it was more a kind of negative Eureka than the end of it was a positive Eureka, if that makes any sense to you. Which is to say that all of a sudden I was blocked. And that's what I mean by negative Eureka. It's like, huh? You know, you look around and, huh? Yeah. And whereas the end was more of a gradual opening and relaxation back into ordinary creative work, you know, ordinary creative effort. So that would be my answer to you. Yeah.
Yeah. I can see that, like, based on what you were telling me, how it would be like a negative Eureka. Thank you for answering that question. I feel like that question was definitely more for me. Maybe, I'm hoping everybody in the audience also got from that, but I was like, I really want to ask this question.
I mean, my character, in a sense, is going through a similar process because he's been, he weighs 607 pounds. He's been gravely injured in a match with with another wrestler who is his longtime nemesis and arch rival, and who has seduced his wife and played him for a fool on more than one occasion. And so has delivered a beating to Haystacks in a match which was scripted and that shouldn't have occurred. And Haystacks is lying, Herschel, really. I think of him as Herschel, because that's his real name, is lying in his hospital bed, really two beds lashed together, immobilized and unable to speak, trying to figure out what's happened, you know, both in the immediate sense and over the longer course of his life, and what to do about it. You know, he wants to know what he wants to know what the meaning of it is. It, you know, the it that has taken his family from him, his wife from him, laid him low, and the it that can release him from the bonds of his history, I would say, and propel him forward to the place he really wants to go, which is Greece, which he sees as a kind of a paradise, an Eden, where he will be able to live free as his authentic self. So in that sense, I'm exploring, you know, existential themes, I guess you'd say. I mean, I didn't set out to explore existential themes, but that's the way you would describe it, you know.
I also love how this novel, it seems to have kind of been your buddy throughout life. And I say buddy lightly, you know, like I feel like it's more like that soulmate, you know, it's carrying you, it's with you during you're moving, you're changing jobs, you're changing careers.
Right.
What was it like? You know, you finally got it published. What was that relationship that changed your work? How did that change?
You know, you write it, but it comes to life when others take it over, when others perceive it, read it, you know, comment on it, criticize it, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, it begins to have a life of its own. And you can't control, I mean, it's your child, but you can't, it's your child. It really is your child. I don't have children of my own. So for me, it kind of does serve as, I used to have a dog, but my wife and I have had a dog and she passed on, and it was a devastating experience. I mean, it really was literally like losing a family member.
Yeah.
But, you know, apart from that, I don't have real live children. And so the book has always been my child. It's something I can put out into the world and say that I made that, you know. every writer, Faulkner said this too, and I'm going to tell you what it is. He said, every writer wants to write, Gilroy was here on the walls of eternity. Okay. And that's, right? I mean, I see you move. Yes. And so the book, the novel, is my way of doing that. But though it's my child, and though I want to protect it and nurture it, once I let it go into the world, I cannot control the way the world is going to treat it. And no writer can. I mean, you can do publicity and marketing and promotion, from here to doomsday, but the world is going to make its own judgments and have its own reactions, and you have no control over that whatsoever, whether you think so or not. So that would be my answer.
And it's very exactly as you put it. It's like having a child, like raising a child. Eventually, they leave. They grow up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They leave. Yeah. They grow up. Exactly. And that's as it should be, because it's. I mean, excuse me. The work shouldn't remain closeted with you or inside you. I mean, you wrote it. I mean, you're not keeping a diary. You're writing a novel. Mm-hmm. And so, although the novel, in a sense, I mean, there aren't that. I'm sure there were things of my own life. I try not to go here, but I'm sure there are events and feelings and people from my own life who have been transmogrified, which is a fancy $50 word for changed into characters and situations in the novel, But I try to stay away from that over-identification with my own creation, mm-hmm. But those things, I mean, you don't keep it with yourself. You've done it to be crass. You produced a product, mm-hmm. and that product is out in the marketplace. And the marketplace will decide whether they like it or don't like it, whether they want to buy it or not, whether it's cheap or expensive, and so on and so on, And that's as it should be, Yeah. I mean, that's the game. That's the process. So, I want to protect it and nurture it and all of that. But I am aware that it has to leave and stand on its own legs. And hopefully it will.
Yeah, has gone to the world, become its own adult. Yeah. I love that. So, actually, now before we move on, I feel like, even when we write for ourselves or for other people, we take pieces of ourselves, we put it in there, put bad and the good pieces we don't even want in there. Right. They somehow come out like, oh wait, I know my great aunt. I know she's in there. I can see her.
But, in other words, I don't think that's, I don't see that as a productive avenue, because that is to say, to be too conscious of the parallels or the modeling that you're doing of the character on somebody you actually know, of a situation you've been in, that you've now, inserted into your work. Mm-hmm. Because I think it binds you it makes things too tight. It binds you too closely. Mm-hmm. It doesn't allow you to. I mean, the wonderful thing about writing or any creative effort is that it's an avenue to freedom. It's an exercise in freedom, I'll call it. And the more that you are tethered to a concept, a person that you, who was a relative or a friend or whoever, and have to try to make sure that all the characteristics of that person appear in the character in the novel, the less freedom you have. You're bound, as I said earlier. And so I tried to stay away from that. Mm-hmm. Always try to stay away from that, even though I sometimes had a sense that, oh, that happened to me, or gee, that reminds me of whoever,
That makes a lot of sense. You're right about the freedom. Yeah. Let's see. I just want to ask one more question here before we start to head towards the end of this. So when it comes to putting your work out, it sounds like, you said that your work doesn't really come alive until a lot of people touch it. So it sounds like a good, positive process for you to get feedback.
Yeah.
How was that process for you?
Well, I mean, it's not published yet, so I haven't gotten, I mean, I've had people read it. My publisher has read it, of course, and several other people whose opinions I respect, but that's a very small sample. And I mean, I will only get, I'll only be able to answer your question fully when it's out in the world, and hopefully people notice it and I get feedback, on, I don't know, Goodreads or whatever. I mean, critical response, that kind of stuff. The real problem is that these days is that there are so many books clamoring for the attention of the reader. And there are fewer readers. I mean, people keep telling me this. I read, and everybody I know reads, but I keep hearing that people don't read. I don't really know whether that's true or not. But the point is that there are so many novels, short story collections, etc., clamoring for the attention of readers that the whole name of the game is, as I said earlier, to lift yourself out of the pack, because otherwise nobody knows you exist. Nobody knows your work exists. And I hate this part of it, to be perfectly honest, but it's a necessary evil. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, you have your book never sees the light of day, truly. And you want it to see the light of day. You want it to be read. You want to be heard. That's one of the I think main drivers for writing in the first place. It's not just about you and you. It's about you tugging at the sleeve of the world and saying, "Hey, I have something to say. Will you listen?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was beautifully said, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, are there any other topics or quotes or inspirational bits that you would like to share with the audience before we move on to where they can find you?
I think I've said enough at this moment.
That was great. Thank you. So now, where can everybody find you, and where can they find your soon-to-be-out book?
Well, I have a website. It's www.steveschlam.com. That's STEVESCHLAM. All small letters, no punctuation. The website is in its infancy. I'm in the process of setting it up, and it's set up, but it needs additional tweaking. We will have a pre-launch period. A pre-launch order period that will start, I want to say, in the middle of January. It can be, and where it will be, where readers will be able to buy the book either through my website or through my publisher, which is www.8house. That's numeral 8, house. I think it's publishing.com. If you look up 8th House Publishing, you'll see the website. And then, of course, we'll be, on the usual places, Amazon and Barnes & Noble and so on and so forth. The launch date is scheduled for March, and the pre-launch order period will begin, I want to say, middle of January. So if you're interested, and I hope everybody is, you'll be able to find us, make a note, put it in your phone or something to go and look for us right around then.
Yeah. And, speaking of, whenever you do get a chance to have the feedback, what the world thinks of it, we would love to have you back so that we can talk about that, talk about how it's going, how it was different than you expected.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. My pleasure.
Awesome. All right. Well, Steve Schlam, author of The Harvesting of Haystacks Kane, thank you so much. Well, congratulations. We're looking forward to your book from the How to Write a Book podcast. Thank you for being here.
And thank you for having me. Take good care.
Thanks. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the How to Write a Book podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to keep up with me and my work, check out the website blackheartedstudios.com. That's www.blackheartedstudios.com. And follow me on Instagram at Mastiel Writes. That's at MASSIEL Writes. As a book coach and publisher, I'm passionate about helping aspiring authors bring their stories to life. So if you've been dreaming of writing a book and don't know where to start, head to my website and let's chat. You get a free 30 minutes on me. Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.